Fancy a quick chuckle? Here's a prank. Here's another one. Here's a very good one. But there are also really bad ones out there. I may have just found the worst one yet. And no, I'm not talking about whatever this is.
I just wanted to ask you, do you want some dick? Mate, what are you doing?
The one I'm talking about is not only unfunny, but downright horrific. It was a typically busy day at Kuala Lumpur Airport in Malaysia, and amongst the chaos, two young women were preparing for this prank. After a brief meeting with their producer, they spot their target. The cameras were rolling and the young women were in motion. They walked up behind their target, and when they reached him, they smeared oil all over his face before running away. By far not the worst prank out there, right? You'd be wrong. The man they had just pranked actually died only 20 minutes later. This was no freak accident or prank gone wrong. They had just helped North Korea assassinate Kim Jong-nam, the brother of Kim Jong-un, the dictator of North Korea. The women had no idea what they had just done. To fully understand how the women were implicated, as well as why and how the man was killed, we need to rewind a little. Siti and Duan were both women in their mid-20s and were living somewhat unexceptional lives in Kuala Lumpur. Siti was from Indonesia and was working at a hotel, building a new life for herself after a failed marriage back in Indonesia. Duan was from Vietnam and, on the other hand, was living quite an adventurous lifestyle as a guest relations officer and was often traveling abroad with some of her patrons. Things changed one day when Siti was approached by a man calling himself James and claiming to be a TV producer. Anyway, James hated being filmed but was otherwise being quite likable and asked if they wanted to be part of a Japanese prank show. James then said that the pranks would be quite innocent and they would be paid for their exploits. As we know already, the show didn't exist at all, and all the producers and people involved were North Korean agents. So despite the red flags, both of them accepted. For months after, Siti and Duan would run around pranking people, essentially by rubbing oils and creams and even baby oil on people.
Yeah, boy.
As fun as rubbing strange liquids on strangers may sound, it gets quite boring after a while. But that was by design. The pranks were uninspired and repetitive. They were still convinced that they were part of a Japanese prank show while being groomed for this very specific task. It was around February that the handlers felt that the women were ready, and they moved on to the next phase. Siti met with her handler at an airport cafe where he indicated the next target to her, as per routine. But this time it wasn't just a random target. It was Kim Jong-nam, the brother of Kim Jong-un, a bald man wearing a light grey suit jacket. To motivate the young women even further, the handler promised that they would receive a bonus if they made a good spectacle. The handler then put some oil on the women's hands and sent them off after their target. In fact, the oil itself is key to how the assassination was carried out. It contained Agent VX, also known as O-ethyl
methylphosphonothioate.
It was invented by a British chemical company in the early 50s while researching new pesticides. Turned out this cool new pesticide was also one of the most lethal nerve agents ever created. So how does it actually kill you? When in contact, it affects the nervous system by interfering with the signals sent from the brain to vital organs and other parts of the body. It usually kills you by suffocation as it paralyzes the diaphragm muscle, which helps you breathe. To put it shortly, it just shuts down your body, and exposure to it can kill you within minutes. It is also classified as a weapon of mass destruction, and the women were running around with it on the palms of their hands towards their target. As we already know, Siti and Duan reach Kim Jong-nam and one after the other rub the oil with the nerve agent across his face. He starts growing more and more panicked and talks to a stewardess. The stewardess then leads him to a security guard where he explains the situation to him. You can then see them walking down the hall to the medical facility. Each minute counts. If you look at the CCTV footage closely, you can see very suspicious individuals scattered around the airport. These were North Korean operatives, making sure that everything was going as planned. There was a scout, a team leader smoking outside, a getaway car driver, and even a chemist on standby, like from a scene straight out of a movie. The operatives didn't have to intervene, however. Shortly after arriving at the clinic, Kim Jong-nam was already suffering severe side effects and tragically passed away before reaching the hospital. Why even assassinate the poor guy? Apparently it's because he visited Tokyo Disneyland. Well, not exactly, but kind of. Let me explain. You see, Kim Jong-nam was the previous heir apparent to his father Kim Jong-il, one of North Korea's historic leaders. Although Kim Jong-un is also a son of Kim Jong-il, he was from another woman, and he wasn't lined up to be the heir. In his adulthood, Kim Jong-nam started having dangerous ideas. He was a supporter of Chinese-style economic reform, but in North Korea. And that is a big no-no. His views weren't celebrated, but they were tolerated, at least in the beginning. The nail in the coffin of his favor would have been his failed visit to Tokyo Disneyland in 2001. I say failed because he actually never got there. He got caught with a fake diplomatic passport at the border in Japan. The North Korean regime felt humiliated by this incident because most likely it exposed how North Korean elites were traveling internationally, but also because the future leader of North Korea can't be seen fanboying for Disney. And this incident would have been used as an excuse to finally sideline him for good. He could have just faded into the unknown, but he continued advocating for reform, and even more so than before. This time he didn't have the protection of being the heir. And the last straw was when he started openly criticizing the regime and saying that his half-brother lacked leadership qualities. And Kim Jong-un doesn't take kindly to critics. He had apparently issued a standing order for his execution. He wanted to make an example out of him. That's why the nerve agent was used. If you're an enemy of the regime, then you'll be eliminated wherever you are and with whatever means necessary. The puzzling part, however, is why leave the most critical part of the operation to two complete strangers?
キム・ジョンナム氏暗殺に関わった工作員が所属するとみられる組織の結成に関わった人物だ.
이번 테러에서 보면은 중거를 철저히 차단하려고 했지요.
If the goal was to distance the regime from the assassination, then it wasn't very effective. And what would have been Siti and Duan's motivation for even killing the guy? Speaking of which, what happened to them? And how didn't they die considering they were covered in the agent themselves? After the so-called prank, Siti and Duan ran to the bathroom. And while running there, they were holding their hands far away from their bodies, making sure not to touch anything. Which, if you ask me, is quite suspicious, but when they got to the bathroom, they made sure to wash their hands thoroughly with water. Both of these things would have neutralized the agent quite effectively. But there's also a theory, which I find more interesting, that the North Korean agents might have used something called a binary concoction. It would essentially consist of breaking down the agent into two non-fatal elements, giving one part to Siti and one part to Dawn, only to be combined on the face of Kim Jong-nam himself, would have activated it. Anyway, after washing their hands, they moved on with their lives as normal, as if nothing had happened. They only found out something was wrong when they got arrested only days later.
Polisi juga nanya-nanya apa yang kamu lakukan di airport itu. Terus polisi itu tiba-tiba bangun, kamu tahu nggak apa yang kamu lakuin katanya.
And at first glance, Siti and Dawn look extremely guilty. Also, I think the LOL t-shirt doesn't really help much. Siti and Dawn were put on trial and were charged with murder. And the punishment for murder in Malaysia is death by hanging. Luckily, after spending 2 years in prison, Siti's charges were dropped, and Dawn was offered a lesser charge and was released after a few months. This wasn't out of the goodwill of the government, more so by the intense diplomatic negotiations that were going on between Malaysia and Indonesia. It was really bad PR at the time, and so Malaysia dropped it. I would argue justice prevailed that day, as being tricked into killing someone shouldn't mean that you get killed yourself. But what of the real culprits here? The North Korean agents, and by extension, North Korea itself. Before the incident, Malaysia had friendly relations with North Korea. After the incident, there was a diplomatic standoff, and North Korea denied any involvement. There's even a clip of North Korean diplomats congratulating the chemist. None of the agents stood trial, and North Korea got away with it. In fact, soon enough, the assassination would disappear completely from focus.
The first sitting American president to set foot on North Korean soil.
I would say it's easy to sit here and judge Siti and Dawn. However, I'm convinced that if it hadn't been them, it could have easily been someone else. Personally, I blame our education. As kids, we were taught that we should beware of the Candyman, but never of the suspicious Japanese YouTube prank show producer and their baby oil. But now you know, and you're welcome. I hope to see you for the next one.